There's something about this tree that doesn't really make sense when you look at it closely. Not because it looks strange at first glance, but because the more you learn about what it does, the harder it becomes to fit it into the way we normally think about plants. We've gotten used to the idea that growing food is difficult, that it requires constant effort, constant adjustment, and a kind of ongoing control just to keep things alive. Most plants behave like that. They depend on very specific conditions. If the temperature shifts too much, they struggle. If the soil isn't right, they stall. If the water is inconsistent, they fail. And because that's what we experience over and over again, we start to assume that this is simply how nature works. But that assumption starts to fall apart when you come across something that doesn't follow those rules at all. There's a tree, known as Moringa, that seems almost designed for the exact conditions that cause most other plants to fail. It grows in dry, degraded soil where nutrients are limited. It tolerates intense heat and long periods without rain. And instead of slowing down under stress, it often accelerates its growth. In the right conditions, Moringa can reach heights of 10 to 15 feet in a single growing season. That alone already places it outside what most people would expect from a plant that requires so little support. But the growth rate is only one part of what makes it unusual. What makes it more difficult to explain is how much it provides relative to how little it demands. Nearly every part of the tree is usable in some way. The leaves can be eaten fresh or dried. The pods are edible. The flowers are edible. Even parts of the roots have been used traditionally. And when people begin to look at the nutritional content of the leaves, the reaction is often the same. It doesn't look real. Gram for gram, the leaves contain significantly more vitamin C than oranges, more calcium than milk, and more potassium than bananas. They also contain all 9 essential amino acids, which makes them a complete protein source, something that is rarely found in plants. At that point, the tree stops looking like a niche curiosity and starts looking like something that contradicts expectations. Because if something like this exists, something that grows quickly, survives harsh conditions, and provides a wide range of nutrients, it raises an obvious question. Why isn't it more common? Why isn't it something you see regularly in gardens or in stores or even discussed more widely? The answer isn't that it's unknown. Moringa has been used for centuries across different regions of the world. In parts of India, Africa, and Southeast Asia, it has played a role in traditional diets and local agriculture for generations. So the lack of visibility isn't due to a lack of discovery. It has more to do with how modern systems decide what becomes widespread and what doesn't. Most of the crops that dominate global agriculture today are not necessarily the most resilient or the most nutritionally dense. They are the ones that can be grown at scale, harvested efficiently, stored for long periods, and transported across large distances without degrading. That is what determines which plants become standard. And this is where Moringa doesn't fit. The leaves, which are one of its most valuable parts, are extremely delicate once they are harvested. They begin to lose structure and quality relatively quickly. Unlike more durable crops, they cannot be easily packaged, shipped long distances, and stored for extended periods without significant loss. Because of that, they never became part of the large-scale distribution systems that define modern food supply chains. Instead, they are often processed into dried powders, which makes them easier to store and transport. But as a fresh, everyday crop, they don't align with the requirements of the system. And over time, that has an effect. Because what doesn't fit into the system doesn't get scaled. And what doesn't get scaled often becomes invisible. This creates a situation where a plant that performs exceptionally well in terms of growth, resilience, and nutrition is less visible than crops that require significantly more input and care simply because it doesn't meet logistical requirements. But even that doesn't fully explain why this tree stands out. The part that tends to shift people's perception the most is not the food it provides, but something else entirely. When the tree matures, it produces pods that contain seeds. These seeds have a property that, at first, seems difficult to believe. If the seeds are dried, crushed into a fine powder, and added to contaminated water, they act as a natural coagulant. The proteins within the seed bind to suspended particles in the water, including dirt, organic matter, and certain types of bacteria. As these particles bind together, they form larger clusters that become heavy enough to sink to the bottom. Over time, the water above becomes significantly clearer. This process has been studied and documented, and in some cases, it has been shown to reduce bacterial content in untreated water by a substantial margin. So now you're looking at a single tree that can grow in difficult conditions, provide a wide range of nutrients, and contribute to making water safer. And that combination is what makes it difficult to ignore, because it doesn't align with the way we expect solutions to appear. We tend to think of food, water, and environmental resilience as separate problems that require separate systems. Agriculture handles food. Infrastructure handles water. Technology handles efficiency. But here you have a biological system that overlaps those functions. And yet, it remains relatively unknown in many parts of the world. At that point, the question becomes less about the tree itself and more about the framework through which we evaluate what is useful. In many cases, the things that become widely adopted are not necessarily the most effective, but the most compatible with existing systems. If something cannot be easily integrated into those systems, it remains localized or underutilized regardless of its potential. This doesn't just apply to plants. It applies to ideas, technologies, and methods across different fields. But with something as tangible as a tree, it becomes easier to see, because the contrast is clear. On one side, you have crops that require constant management, precise conditions, and ongoing input. On the other side, you have a tree that grows rapidly, tolerates stress, provides nutrition, and even contributes to water purification. And yet, the first category is what dominates visibility. That contrast raises a broader question, not just about Moringa, but about how many other examples exist that follow a similar pattern. How many systems, methods, or resources are available but remain outside of mainstream awareness because they don't fit into the structure that determines what gets distributed and what doesn't. And once you start thinking in those terms, it becomes harder to assume that what you see most often is necessarily what works best. Instead, it becomes more likely that what you see most often is simply what fits most easily into the way things are currently organized. That shift in perspective is what makes this tree interesting, not just because of what it does, but because of what it suggests. It suggests that there may be solutions that don't look like solutions at first, not because they are ineffective, but because they don't align with the systems we rely on. And once you recognize that, the question changes. It's no longer just about why this tree isn't more widely used. It becomes about what else might exist that we haven't fully paid attention to. Because if something this efficient, this resilient, and this functional can remain relatively overlooked, then it's possible that the boundaries of what we consider normal are narrower than we think. And once that idea sets in, it's difficult to go back to assuming that the systems we see represent the full picture.